because that's part of our culture too. It's part of our belief systems and our fears. So they all have to be dressed, and we'll dress them in plaid shirts if we know that's what they like. Otherwise, we'll put them in a robe. And if we don't want to deal with them in more detail, we'll put them in a robe with a hood so we really don't see their face. You see, you're getting an idea that where you create this, you have to. You're getting data, and you have no other choice other than to interpret it in terms of your experience base. It's not like you've failed, to get it right. It's just that you've done all you can do. Okay. We'll go a little further with that. Many of you are familiar. The Hindus have chakras, 7 chakras, root chakra up to a crown chakra, and all these chakras mean something. They have connections to that part of the body, and they have certain metaphysical connections and so on. These are just metaphors. Okay? Chakras are not fundamental. When you heal, you might use light beams. Or when you send energy to somebody else, you might use light beams. Or even energy itself. They're all metaphors. Energy is a metaphor. Light's a metaphor. Energy is a metaphor for something that makes a change. If we do something that makes a change, then that's energy. Okay? Light's a metaphor because we have a belief that we can't do something if we don't actually interact with it. You see, you can't just say, be well. That won't work. You have to actually do something to it, because in this reality, if we make anything happen, we have to do something. So we take that with us. That's our concept. Those are our beliefs. So an awful lot of what you experience and what you read about in the larger reality is this sort of thing. Okay, there is no light. It's just data. What about energy bodies? We're going to see auras when we do this thing here, not the next 2 hours, but the one after that. And we're going to look at those, but it's just data. There's nothing fundamental about that. I've seen auras now for about 30 years or so, and they look real, they seem real, but they're just data. They're metaphors, like everything else. That's all we can deal with. All right. So the point of that was that it's the same here. What you interact with here in this reality is also just data. And you also make out of it however you interpret that data. It's your interpretation. It was just easy to see that when we went into the non-physical about, oh yeah, okay, we clothe everybody. Sure, I get that now. You do the same thing here in this reality. It's how you interpret the data creates your reality. All right, now let's, if we're going to live in this virtual reality, let's talk a little bit about how it works. Okay, let me ask a question. Does oxygen need to be rendered for the characters in the World of Warcraft or in The Sims? Do the people who make those games have to render oxygen so that their characters can breathe? Well, of course not. So that's ridiculous. Those aren't real characters. They don't need oxygen. They're just computers. They're made up in a computer. We're no different. We're no different at all. Okay, computational requirements are greatly reduced if you only need to model effects. Okay, so what happens in the World of Warcraft when your giant lizard or whatever your character is falls in a lake and doesn't know how to swim? It drowns. Why does it drown? Lack of oxygen. You're modeling the effects of oxygen. You don't have to model oxygen. The only time you have to model oxygen is when you do an experiment that actually sees a molecule of oxygen. Then you have to model oxygen. If you don't do something that lets you look at a molecule of oxygen, no need to model it. There's no need to model any oxygen in this room. There doesn't have to be any oxygen in this room at all. We just model it because it's probable. Okay, now here's how that works. See, we take a measurement. Remember, we're going back to we're tying in now to the physics of the double slit experiment. Here's the measurement. Take a breath. Well, I didn't fall over. Therefore, the measurement said that it's probable that there's oxygen available. Because there's oxygen available, I don't fall over. Okay, now, the reason that it's probable is because you look at the rule set. There's enough plankton in the ocean, there's enough trees in the world, there's enough photosynthesis going on that there's enough oxygen. So you do all the physics, you do whatever, and you say, yeah, the probability is that there's oxygen here. Okay, then we get to breathe without a problem. Because it's probable. Doesn't require oxygen. You see? I know, very difficult concepts, but that's, that's the way this works. So, it's the same with everything. There's no reason for the system to model the brain inside your skull unless somebody cuts your skull open. If you have brain surgery, then they have to model the brain. Other than that, you just can act like you have one most of the time, right? Anyway, so that's how this works. It's no different than us than it does for those Sims characters. It's a great waste of time to model things, to render things that don't need to be rendered. Okay? In the World of Warcraft game, if you take your character and suddenly turn them around and look a different direction, you'll see trees pop up out of the ground and a mountain pop up out of the ground. That's because their server's really slow compared to ours. They don't change their scenes, they don't delta T every 10 to the minus 44 seconds like we do. But basically, it's the same sort of thing. It's a virtual reality. You're getting a data stream, your own personal data stream. When you're playing World of Warcraft or Sims, you get your own personal data stream to your computer. It's still a multiplayer game. All right. Now, this is a very important point, and we're going to make more of it later, so I'll give you a little notice. Listen to this one. When something is rendered, it must be consistent both historically with existing data and causally with the rule set. Okay, in other words, it has to appear to have a consistent physical basis or physical justification. Okay, so there's two rules there. When something gets rendered, when a measurement is made, a particle goes from being non-physical in probability to being a physical particle. When a measurement's being made here, we take a breath, okay, we get a result. We get a physical result. The physical result is that we continue going because there's justification for the oxygen. Now, you can't have this rendering has to be consistent. You can't look out your window and see a lake and turn around and look out your window again and see a forest, and turn around and look out again and you see a field. It doesn't work like that. It has to be consistent. Once something has come into this reality through a measurement, it stays here. That's why those particles, when measured, became particles. All they could do is travel in a straight line till they hit what was behind them. Once they're particles, they act like particles. They got to obey the rule set. Same here. You need consistency. Once it's in the database, once it's into our reality, it stays in our reality. Okay? So you can't have inconsistency, and you can't have something that you can't render something, suddenly, things fall up or do other things that are counter to the rule set. So those are the only two rules. And we see this leaves a lot of room that we're going to explain later for multiple solutions. Okay, I'm going to do an old saying that you've probably chuckled at and decided was just a semantics exercise, but I'm going to give you a definitive answer for it. I always have fun with this. If a tree falls in the woods and there's nobody there to hear it, does it make a sound? Right? You've all heard that many times. All right, well, here is the definitive answer. There is no tree, there's no woods, there's no listener. They're all virtual, statistical, okay, and probabilistic. So here's how it works. Before, a person walks into a woods and he looks and makes a measurement. When he makes a measurement, what he sees is what is probable there according to historical consistency and the rule set. So let's say it's a tree standing but dead and wobbling, but it hasn't fallen over yet. So that's his measurement. That's what he sees because it's probable. Okay? And it's probable because of the rule set, all the history. Okay. Now, he goes out of the woods, and if he immediately runs back in and looks, he'll still see that same tree there because it's still there. It came into the reality, it's still going to be there. It has to have consistency. But let's say he goes out of the woods and he comes back 5 years later, and he looks right where that tree was, and he sees a dead tree laying down on the ground. Why did he see the dead tree laying on the ground? Because it was probable. 5 years later, if you look at the rule set and all the possible storms and wind and everything else and the condition of the tree and how much force it would take to blow it over, et cetera, you find that the probability is that it would be lying on the ground. You see, it's not so that the tree had to fall over to go from standing up to lying on the ground. The first measurement found it standing up. The next measurement found it laying down. It's only the belief in an objective reality that says that it had to fall. See, I know it's getting weird, but hang in there. Okay. Now, your consciousness experiencing a virtual reality generated by consciousness. So see, that makes you not only the experiencer, but also the creator. You are consciousness. You're part of this larger consciousness system. We all are. We're all netted. We are all one consciousness. We're all pieces of it, and we're all netted together.